everybody. It's Matthew here with my good friend Dave Dalt. We did this Star Wars chat, 2 weeks ago now?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And we had such a good time with it. We are doing it again. And so, yes, I'm going to put this up on Dork Lords. Of course, Dave has an amazing channel of his own, which this probably won't go up on, but Things Unseen.
Things Not Seen.
Things Not Seen.
Things Not Seen.
They are unseen, but they are things not seen.
Yeah, it's a radio show and it's a podcast, and I also produce radio shows and podcasts for other folks. So, there's lots of places where my voice is heard, but this is the chance for me actually to talk about things that I really care about with my dear friend Matthew Rice.
Yay. And that thing is Star Wars.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Star Wars again, although I'm very happy to talk about other media properties and geek culture anytime you want to have me back.
All right. I accept that challenge.
Good.
That's great.
And we will likely, just from the walk over here from the train station, it's likely that we will delve into other media properties as we're trying to answer these questions for this week's show.
Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. Yes. As it turns out, we live in the same town. We live in Chicago.
Yep.
I took the train down here to Hyde Park.
Yep.
And here I am in Dave's awesome studio, chatting a little Star Wars. So the topic for today, at least to get us started, and we'll probably branch out, but basically the topic is revolving around Episode 9.
Yes.
How what would be a satisfying conclusion to Episode 9, specifically as it relates to Rey. So what would be a satisfying conclusion to this trilogy as far as the main plot line, Rey and Kylo in some ways?
Although with a caveat that this is going to be a hypothetical discussion, and as I've communicated to you off camera, I'm much more comfortable talking about stuff that we actually know from what we've seen as opposed to trying to guess
it's true.
What's going to happen.
Now, I love theories. He doesn't. So I can provide perhaps theories, and then he can shoot them down with factual data from stuff that's already happened, which is totally cool. I'm good with that. So it's not necessarily as much as what will happen. We don't have special knowledge. You're like, oh, I saw this set photo.
Not yet. We don't have special knowledge yet.
Correct. But we can also, based on what we know about story arcs and literature, we can say what maybe should happen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way this comes about. So I'll just set the table a little bit. I feel like this trilogy has a little bit, they've written themselves into a corner a little bit. In that, I guess to put it simply, you've got maybe an overpowered Rey and an underpowered Kylo. In Force Awakens, Rey defeats Kylo one-on-one. In a duel, there's no help for either side. She wins. Pretty convincingly.
Yeah.
The only reason she doesn't even kill him is because the earthquake shows up in the between them. Otherwise, she probably finishes him off in that moment.
Yeah.
So there's that. Second movie, they join forces temporarily. And then when the time comes, then where it's obvious that Kylo is not going to mend his ways, she is not beaten by him. He does not overwhelm her with power. In fact, I could argue that her power is not just in her offensive abilities, spells, but her ability to use the Force is actually equal, at least, to his, I feel.
Yeah.
So I think most people, if you ask them, hey, what would happen in Episode 9? I think most people would probably, in a simplistic way, just say, Rey defeats Kylo and the First Order is destroyed. I think that would be what most people's answers would be. Because
that worked so well last time.
Right. So my reaction to that is I don't think that's a satisfying ending.
Okay.
Because it's kind of a duh. Oh, Rey to beat Kylo? Yeah, she could do that, Episode 7. Why should we think that doesn't happen in Episode 9?
Okay.
So if you compare that, let's say, to the original trilogy, 4, 5, 6, you've got Luke versus Darth, right? And first one, Luke pretty much survives. Darth Vader's about to shoot him with I've got you now. He only survives because Han Solo comes in. He's rescued by his friends.
Yes.
Luke is saved by his friends.
Yes.
Second movie, Luke's a little more powerful now. He's going to go take on Darth Vader. Just gets hammered. I mean, loses his hand.
Yes.
He is outmatched big time. Again, only survives because his friends come to save him, hanging off at Cloud City. And so then it's the third movie where you could, if you were to ask someone after the first two movies, what's going to happen in the third movie? Most people would say, oh, probably Luke defeats Darth Vader. But you didn't really see how that was going to necessarily happen at that moment because it seemed, again, like Darth is up here. Luke, he's got a ways to go to catch up.
Yeah.
And so that still left you with this like anticipation of how's that going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I don't know that there's how's that going to happen. Yeah. Well, if they're left in a room alone, she could probably beat him. Like that doesn't, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't, I don't feel the tension of how could she possibly pull off defeating Kylo Ren. So my thought is, I mean, as much as J.J. Abrams, sometimes he's made questionable decisions, maybe in directing before. I actually respect him as a director. I think he's not stupid.
No.
So I would say that is not the way this is going to go. I do not think this movie ends with Rey defeats Kylo in the First Order. I mean, I don't know how it's going to end, but I feel like just on the surface level, that ending is not satisfying.
Okay. Define what you mean by satisfying?
Well, do
you mean emotionally or narratively satisfying?
That's a good point. Maybe both.
Okay.
I feel like a typical narrative sets you up at, say, the end of Act 2, which would be the end, I guess, in this case of the second movie, of a situation where you've got everything for the hero has fallen apart.
Yes.
They're at their lowest ebb,
mm-hmm.
and they have to find a way to, against all odds, defeat whatever the obstacle is, if it's a person, if it's nature, if it's whatever.
Yeah.
Here, I don't see that. I don't see that Rey is at her ebb. I don't see that there's like, how could she possibly, achieve whatever ends she was trying to achieve? So I think narratively speaking is kind of what I'm saying.
Okay.
But
so in terms of story structure, you're saying that, if I hear you correctly, in terms of just classic story structure, this particular trilogy is a hot mess.
Yes.
Okay. So that's something that we can actually kind of delve into.
I mean, for instance, I come back a lot to Lord of the Rings a lot.
Yeah.
I talk about it on the channel a lot. But so at the end of the second book,
mm-hmm.
if you were to ask people like, okay, what do you feel like is going to happen at the end of the third book? People are going to say, oh, well, Frodo probably destroys the ring.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time when you're seeing like, how could he possibly get to that point, based on what we've seen so far? But
so we know that it has to be this.
Right.
But it's a mystery how it will be this.
Correct.
We don't know at the end of the second film in this current trilogy, and we talked about this on the walk over here, how hard it is to name these because we've got
Sure.
the original trilogy, which is different from the originary trilogy, which is, so in this particular trilogy, it's very hard to see what that payoff needs to be.
Right.
And it's because they've made some bobbles along the way. So first of all, the First Order is at the same time too powerful and not powerful enough. So when we first see the First Order, it's like full bloom, well established, and it's rigid and lockstep, and it's got battalions, it's got everything.
They put a gun in a planet.
It put a gun in a planet. It's got Captain Phasma. And then we begin to understand that the First Order is rife in the second film with internal conflict. So those two things are contradictory already. How is it that the First Order is able to be so effective and yet so ineffective? And so it's telling kind of two different stories. We get really powerful characters like Kylo stopping a blaster blast in the first, and the introduction of Captain Phasma, and both of those moments get completely squandered. Like you're a fan of saying that Kylo is introduced too strong and then is pulled back and made weak. Captain Phasma is just a tease.
Yeah.
Like there's some
kind of a lot that could have happened with that character.
So much. And I mean, we know nothing about the character, so we have no investment when she finally dies, and there's no threat at all. And the same with Snoke. I mean, we've got these kind of clay puppets that are introduced in like, ooh, you're supposed to be scared of the big bad. supposed to be scared of this big bad, but they're just empty shells that are presented to us in the structural place where a big bad should be, without any development of the big badness of them.
I like that concept. Yeah, they put a placeholder.
Yeah, and I've said this before to you. I think this is the Yellow King problem from True Detective.
Oh, sure.
Where you,
season 1 of True Detective.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen it, they introduced this concept of the Yellow King,
who's supposed to be this kind of embodiment of evil.
And it made a lot of people, myself included, go and look up the Yellow King, and people did all this research.
Yeah. and
it really amounted to.
And then when we finally meet the Yellow King, he's kind of a fat alcoholic guy.
Yeah.
And I mean, not the embodiment of evil. And certainly, I mean, there was not a payoff at the end of that first season of True Detective that was satisfying to the hype that we had been given.
Good call. And so that's satisfying in that way. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and so we're not getting anything to build up the structure or the content of the hype that we've gotten for Captain Phasma or for Snoke. Or I mean, if Snoke had turned out to be Jar Jar Binks, and this had been like a grand narrative plot the whole time, which was one internet thing, I actually would have really been on board with that. I would have been like, this master plan of Jar Jar Binks would explain.
I would not have been on board with it, but I would have smirked at it.
It would have redeemed so many bad choices that were made in the prequel trilogy. However, they chose not to go that way. But in the place of not going that way, they really didn't go anyway. I mean, how much more do you know about Snoke at this point than you know about Admiral Akbar?
You don't.
Yeah. And I feel an emotional connection to Admiral Akbar. I at least
one of the greatest lines of all time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a trap!
Exactly. But in those moments with Akbar, you get what you need for a supporting character. But Snoke's not a supporting character. Snoke is the major antagonist, supposedly. But we don't even get Snoke ever even doing this.
Now, if we listen to the comments from our previous video,
okay,
there are some people that are convinced Snoke's not dead. That Snoke, because he's displayed such amazing amounts of power, which he has.
Yes.
That he's still around, and his spirit still exists, and he's going to be still the big bad in the next movie. I suppose that's possible. It is possible.
Sure.
I don't think it's probable, but it's possible.
Okay.
So maybe that is the external threat, a la Emperor Palpatine, that they can rally behind. But.
Okay, so then let's look at Snoke, and we're going to get to Rey, but let's look at Snoke. All right, indulge me for a moment.
Sure, let's do this. This is what this is about, indulging.
Let's think about this in terms of another kind of well-established major media property that has some of the same structures, The Wizard of Oz.
Okay, Wizard of Oz.
Okay, so if Snoke is the equivalent of the wizard. Okay, so a presentation of an entity that all along is just an empty shell. Okay, and I'm not saying but I mean, so far that's all we've got. We don't have any background for Snoke other than he's just a.
I would argue the one part of that is based on, for instance, the fact that he can unite Kylo and Rey over the galaxy to have their video chats. I would say he's not an empty shell in that way. He actually does have power.
Okay.
As opposed to the wizard in Wizard of Oz, which is just literally a con man. He's a showman.
Yeah, but in terms of the structure,
okay, yeah.
I think that right now Snoke is occupying the same place. If we just take out all the content and just look at the structure,
okay.
Snoke is occupying the same space in that narrative that the wizard occupies in The Wizard of Oz. In other words, someone that is referenced but you never get any content about.
Right.
And you get the intimation of power without ever actually seeing a lot of that power manifested. Okay. So if that's the case, if Snoke is this kind of this MacGuffin of many MacGuffins that we have in this series, what is there to fear about Snoke? So far, all that he's managed to do is make a very powerful person, Kylo Ren, have basically adolescent tantrums. And all that he's managed to do for another very powerful character is make her have visions and connections.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what to do with that in terms of, within The Wizard of Oz. And I realize I've kind of gone down a yellow brick road of my own here.
Which by the way, again, 2/3 of the way through Wizard of Oz, if you had polled people, they would have said she probably defeats the witch and gets home.
But that's the thing.
But how does she possibly do that?
Exactly. So you have a clear narrative in the Wizard of Oz. You don't have what is Rey's quest at this point?
Right.
I mean, Rey's quest was kind of to figure out who she was.
Right.
Kylo Ben has kind of answered that question.
There's a debate of whether he actually
if we trust, and she was supposed to try and get Luke, but now Luke is gotten and Luke is dead. So what is her purpose now? I mean, I'm asking you.
You're asking me. I think her purpose will be to take down the First Order. I mean, she's with the Resistance, right? She's she's going to be a vital part of that movement to save the galaxy.
And this, again, raises the point that I made jokingly earlier in the conversation, but now this really is the question that I want to ask, particularly about if that's Rey's quest, to what end? Because in this narrative, when we took down the equivalent of the First Order last time, it did no good. You know? Is the very nature of this galaxy.
So what you're saying, in other words, just to clarify, you're talking about when they took down the Empire.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, you took down the Empire, but the trappings were still there, and then they just kind of reformed as the First Order, and nobody really got helped as a result.
It didn't end the problem. The problem just reconstituted itself with a slightly different graphic design scheme.
Right, they branded themselves differently. You're like, hey, check it out, First Order.
Yeah, but still got a guy in black with a mask.
Yeah.
And still got, a Grand Moff Tarkin wannabe. And
still got the same ships, more or less.
It's slightly more diverse than it was the first time around. But,
slightly.
But other than, I mean, in the same way that the Proud Boys currently are slightly more diverse than the brown shirts were 70 years ago. Okay, but doesn't matter. The ethos is the same. Nothing got fixed. So why would Rey, if Rey knows this, and if Rey actually understands this, why in the world would Rey want to bring down the First Order? What's the motivation if it's just going to linger around again? If the desire for the First Order maintains, she doesn't have to kill the First Order. She has to kill the very desire for the First Order. How can she do that?
Well, then maybe it's more about, I mean, we talked about this in the last video, but I think you were, what I'm about to say, I think you were kind of like, I hope this doesn't go this way. But I saw that she was going to start a new Jedi Academy and perhaps start teaching Jedi, and the idea that the Jedi would then reassert themselves and become, space cops again to help bring order the galaxy. Yeah,
and if that's the case, then there is no future for this galaxy because it's just spinning a drain. It's just, we're going to always have some type of Jedi as some kind of Herculean force for good that doesn't actually do good. And then then that's going to create its fundamental opposite in the Empire / First Order / whatever they call it. But nothing ever progresses. I would love to see this universe, this cosmos, get out of the need for a polarity between Jedi and Empire type entities. Okay. I'm really interested in that as a narrative move.
So what would she start a completely different school is what you're suggesting then? Or would she, I mean, like, how does she, let's say, for instance, okay, she did the first Order through her designs probably, or someone, or the Resistance gets destroyed.
Yeah.
Kylo's either redeemed or he dies or he's kind of out of the picture as a negative influence.
Yeah.
How does then the galaxy start healing itself in your mind? Is it a school? What is it?
Many fanboys will not like my answer.
Okay.
Because I really like the second movie for the feminine aspects that it brings. Okay. So, for example, and I can't remember the name of the purple-haired general played by Laura Dern.
Right. Okay. If you hadn't asked me, I would have told you. But okay, yes.
But okay, so there's a real sense in some of the fanboy
Holdo.
Holdo?
Holdo, I think?
Holdo. Okay. Correct us in the comments, but in the fanboy culture, there's a real sense that somehow Poe's story got flummoxed in favor of this purple-haired admiral. And that instead, Poe should have won the day, doing the same kind of rah-rah, bomb it kind of stuff that happened in the first sets of movies.
Sure.
I really like the fact that instead what happened was a more cautionary feminine approach was taken and it was more tactical, and that instead of just going it seems like there's great comments that I read in some reviewers basically picked up on the fact that the old way of fixing the problem doesn't fix the problem. that just going and bombing something or blowing it up is no longer going to work in this universe, because what the narrative has told us is that way of approaching the problem just reconstitutes the same polarities,
Gotcha.
which is kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And instead, what we're seeing with purple-haired Wonder Woman flying the ships too late or whatever is a different approach to the problems, which is incredibly frustrating to certain fanboys that want to see things blow up, but is actually going to progress this universe towards something new. Which and the introduction of all these different types of voices, these minority voices, these alternatives to kind of white male hero voices, is actually really good for the overall universe, both in terms of its real world kind of meat world value, but also because what the universe has demonstrated to us is that as long as we kind of let the old ways of blowing things up and having good guys and bad guys in that sense kind of duke it out, it's not going to progress the universe. And again, if Rey's only option is to start a new alternative to the Jedi school, then we're just in the same drain dump.
Okay.
If Rey instead, following the kind of Holdo model, can actually conceive of a new way of approaching these problems that the Jedis couldn't fix, then that's actually interesting to me.
I would say, hopefully, unlike Holdo, Rey would actually communicate her plans to other people. That was my only real problem with Holdo, was like, come on.
Although, honestly, do you think Poe would have listened?
Yes.
Really?
I do. I feel like if Holdo says, there is a base, we're heading to this base, and then we're going to do a decoy, and what we're going to try to do is make them keep following the decoy while we are safe on the base. I feel like he'd been like, all right.
Isn't it Poe's job to follow orders, though? Isn't he part of a regiment? Isn't he part of a military structure?
I hear you.
Yeah.
But I'm just, communication, I think we can all agree communication is a good thing typically.
Sure.
I get it that you can't always, there's secrets.
Yeah.
You don't want to tell secrets. But it felt like, to me, it felt like the writers were like, we want this to happen.
Yes.
How do we make this happen?
Yes.
Oh, I know. Holdo just won't tell him. It felt weird that she wouldn't just say something. I just
why would you put the blame on Holdo and not on Poe? Oh, I know. Poe's going to be an asshole, and Poe's not going to follow orders. Okay, that's the problem, is that Poe can't follow orders. Okay, so there is a plan. Poe messes up the plan. If Poe had just followed orders, there would have been. But no, we fanboys want to say, oh, but Poe must be right because he's the white guy. No, he's freaking not right. He's not right.
I hear you.
Follow the orders. Yeah.
I feel like
we're going to get such bad comments about this. I love it.
I feel like the fact that Poe is he genuinely cares about the safety and success of the resistance.
Yes.
And he is doubting in that moment that. And he maybe has reasonable reason to think that there might be somebody on the inside who's, spies on the inside.
Which is a good reason why Holdo doesn't tell anybody, because if there's the possibility that there are spies leaking it out, then she doesn't want to tell anybody.
I just feel like a good leader figures out what's needed in that moment, what was needed in that moment. This guy is a loose cannon. I think they even say he's a loose cannon. Either, if this guy's going to be a part of what we're doing, it's possible this guy could go off the rails if I don't give him something, tell him something about the plan. Maybe don't tell the whole plan, but you're like, you give him enough that you're like, okay, we're good now. Yeah, I mean, you don't dismiss him. There's a way to handle it. I feel like her management style, maybe needed a little work
within the universe. That makes sense. Now let's notch it up to story structure. Given what we've inherited in terms of story structure, there's no way that Holdo could have done this the right way, because the entire way that the structure of the story unfolds is dependent upon Poe being a loose cannon, and whatever she tells him, he has to act like a guy that knows best.
The story was definitely pushing in that direction, sure.
Yeah, and so given the fact that that's what the story demands, there is no way for our purple-headed heroine to actually do this the right way. And that, I think, speaks to a larger problem that I'm really glad that the directors of this film, the creators of the film, are trying to address. And that is that there are larger structural problems in our meat world that is typified by the fact that whenever you put somebody who's not white and male central into the hero position,
the power structure,
the viewership goes batshit, apeshit. All right, and this gets us back to Rey. Okay, is our hope for Rey that she's simply going to reconstitute the white male hero structure for the third film, only this time with boobs?
Right. In other words, does she just light up the lightsaber? Yeah.
And she defeats the guy in black, and now
Kylo.
Yeah.
Or defeats it. When obviously in Return of the Jedi, it's Luke defeats Darth, but doesn't kill him.
Yeah.
And then there's a redemption moment, but still there's a lightsaber fight. I've beaten you now. I don't have to kill you.
Yeah. When Luke goes to Vader, defeats him, and then offers graciousness and forgiveness, that's Luke being magnanimous. If Rey were to do the same thing, we would read that as weak femininity. That would be her, and it's the same reason why, Holdo, as a woman making that decision, we read as it's her weakness and indecision that causes, the problem, not Poe's testosterone poisoning that causes the problem.
The toxic masculinity.
Yeah, the toxic masculinity. And so again, how are we going to read the end of the trilogy, this current trilogy, with regard to Rey, if Rey simply steps into kind of masculine boots, lights up the lightsaber, and wins, and then offers magnanimous kind of forgiveness? Is that going to be satisfying to us? Because that's what we expect from a woman. We don't expect it from Luke, and so it's narratively satisfying because it introduces something new into defeating the foe. But one, we've seen it before, and so...
Two, as I mentioned before, I don't think Rey defeating Kylo is that special.
Yeah.
It's just not special at this point.
No.
So there needs to be something else.
Which is why allowing for a completely unique approach in this universe would actually, to me, be very narratively satisfying. I would hate it if she reconstitutes the Jedi Order, because the Jedi Order is a failed order for many of the reasons that I've said in the last video and in this video.
Sure.
And simply striking Kylo down gives us no kind of closure at all. But already they're playing with Kylo and Rey in this weird, they're connected. Neither one is a completely light or dark figure. They Now
I'll say this.
Yeah.
There are people that are, they're shipping their relationship.
I was going to say,
And there is they touch hands, and he's had his shirt off.
I know.
And there's like a little sexual tension there.
Hunky Ben.
I would hate that.
Yeah.
Frankly, if they end up together and they have a kid or something like that. Again, with modern storytelling sensibilities, the idea of saying, yep, the ideal ending for a woman is she should marry the guy and have a kid. Yeah. Great. Like, she's not a Disney princess. I know Disney runs this thing, but I don't think they're going with the Disney princess ending.
Well, and on the walk over here, it's not just Disney, but we also talked about Mad Men and the whole kind of Peggy Olson character arc, where Peggy Olson has this great, strong feminist character arc, and then in the very last episode, she ends up randomly calling the guy that she's been kind of attacking, for most of the series, and suddenly says, "I love you, let's get married." Yeah. Again, it's a cop out. It's a put on. Yeah, and I'm hearing you saying that it would be a cop out and a put on if that ends up happening with Rey and Kylo.
Right.
And I completely agree.
Again, it's also a statement for, as you put it, the meat world.
Yeah.
When you say meat world, I assume you're talking real world.
Let's
you and I
touch.
are living here.
Yeah, that's meat.
Wait, we just had our FaceTime in whatever. Okay.
So there's three levels that we're working with here. There's kind of meat world, which is us observing this story as it unfolds, sitting in the theater seats, eating our popcorn. That's the meat world. There's the world within the narrative itself, the kind of what we would call, in theory, the kind of mimetic world, where the characters have knowledge and they act on that knowledge and they're interacting with one another. And then there's that weird structural world in between where we understand that certain of the decisions that the characters make within their world is not dictated by their world, but is dictated by the kind of genre and structure of story that we're observing. So this is not a comedy. It's an opera. This is not a tragedy in the sense that we're kind of convinced that most of the characters are going to make it out alive, as opposed to like the end of a Shakespeare. Yeah.
Right. So, for instance, so you take Hamlet.
Yeah.
2/3 of the way through Hamlet.
Yeah.
If you were to poll again, and you've never read Hamlet before, I've just read the first 2/3.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen in the end?
Yes.
I think most of them, they're not going to guess exactly what happens in the end, but they're going to say probably Hamlet gets revenge and he probably dies in the process. It feels like it's a tragedy, and that's probably the way it's headed.
And not just that it feels like it's a tragedy, but if they look in the complete Shakespeare in the table of contents, it's listed with the tragedies.
Right.
And in fact, the title will sometimes say the tragedy of.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is to say, you should expect certain things from this narrative based on the classification that it's in. And that's that middle band that I'm talking about. It's not our meat world. It's not the world of the characters. It's that interface between the two that demands that certain things have to happen, which is why I think it's so interesting that the creators of this current trilogy are playing with the expectations of the genre, because now Star Wars is a very well-established genre, and it's got some expectations about what the hero is supposed to do.
Got to be a lightsaber.
Got to be a light, and all that. And so playing with that in this second film, where Poe doesn't get to be the hero in that moment, but instead is the guy that messes it up, that's really interesting to me as a person who's interested in progressing that structure. It's really frustrating to a lot of fanboys who want just, I have the structure, give me the structure again and again, just give me that same story again and again. Patch Adams is basically Dead Poet Society with a clown nose. But it's, beat for beat, it's the exact same structure, and I just want more of that. Just give me different things with different clown noses, maybe boobs this time. Just give me the same thing. I'm not interested in that, but I recognize that a lot of people are.
Gotcha.
But to me, that's why I say things like just reconstituting the Jedi Order is by no means satisfying to me, because I want to see this universe progress. I want to see it learn from itself.
There does need to, I agree that there needs to be a change for the better, and just having things get reset to neutral in a way.
Yeah.
Like, we're reset to everything's fine for now.
New Jedis, and it's going to work this time.
Right, it's going to work this time would be, undercutting the value of the ending. You're right. It would be, okay, so until 10 years from now, when all the horrible things happen again, and there'll be another battle, and there's another kid who's born with the power of the Force, and they're going to come up and save the day 20 years from now. Okay. Right. There needs to be, I'll put this in Game of Thrones terms.
Okay.
One of the interesting things to me about Game of Thrones is the idea that Daenerys, there's a big comment. She has a quote where she's like, I'm not here to, change the wheel. I'm here to break the wheel. Yep. Like, in other words,
yes,
who knows what the ending is going to be of Game of Thrones? But my
certainly
guess
not
is
George R.R. Martin, because the ending that he wrote they're far off of it now. So
I don't think he's written it yet. But point being, it would be unsatisfying, I think, if Daenerys ends up sitting on the Iron Throne, because all it means is life's just going to keep going. Like, the houses will still fight.
Yeah.
There, at some point, there'll be a rebellion, and she'll get taken out, and then the next person comes in. So the idea is that it's this moment in time. The reason we're talking about this moment in time in this story is this is that time when this way of doing things changed. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like she probably doesn't ascend to a throne.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a holding elections thing. Maybe she deliberately puts the throne aside. But whatever it is, if she just they defeat the Night King, and then she's like, "Yep, awesome! I'm going to sit on the throne now. Yay, House Targaryen!" You're like, "Oh, okay. Well, that gave a nice little beat, but that's not a satisfying ending, because you realize that nothing has changed." And so I think maybe that's kind of what you're getting at a little bit with this, is that something needs to change in a seismic way. That's not just, the Jedi are back.
Yeah.
Great.
So Schopenhauer, the philosopher, would say that history never breaks out of that cycle. There's always the eternal recurrence of the same, and that history basically is a tragedy.
Okay.
Nietzsche comes along and kind of imbues that idea of Schopenhauer and says, yes, things never change. You can't break out of the circle. And the whole point is the change in you to where you accept this. And the par excellence example of this is the movie Arrival from a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Where, spoiler alert, the main character gets a chance to see the future and decides to embrace that future, as tragic as it is, but embraces it fully. So Arrival is a Nietzschean movie where you see the future, you understand you can never break out of it, but the whole hero's journey is coming to grips with that and accepting that. Okay. Arrival sets us up for a Nietzschean narrative, and it's very satisfying in its payoff if you understand what it's doing. Nothing in the genres of either what you were
Game
just
of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. Sorry, for some reason I had Lord of the Rings in my head. Either Game of Thrones,
For some reason,
or
everything's in Lord of the Rings. Everything's Lord of the Rings. Okay, great. I'm glad you've agreed to that. Stamp. Got it.
Yeah, I'm now part of the cult, even though I'm not part of the cult.
Yeah.
But so nothing in Game of Thrones, nothing in the Star Wars multiple trilogies is pushing towards a Nietzschean payoff. Like, the point of Star Wars is not the characters resolving themselves to the fact that they're never going to break out of the polarity between the Jedi and whatever Empire First Order. The whole point of what we're moving towards is progress. We do this, it's going to get better. That's the entire payoff. Okay. Whereas in Arrival, it's not the payoff.
Gotcha.
The point is not to get better. The point is to accept the horror of what is. So there's nothing genre structure wise that is going to be satisfying if suddenly we just get looped back into the same thing again and again. So there has to be some progress in this universe. And what's interesting to me is that there was progress and the promise of progress at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Sure.
Yeah. That things have been made right now to the point where something can get better. And the fact that now the new set of movies is going into that problem, but it's going into that problem now in a new set of ways with a new set of eyes and a new type of voicing leads me to think that maybe there's a way out that actually does lead to progress. But progress can't be the reconstitution of the polarity. Can't be. Because that, I mean, to me, structurally, that gets us into where if we're 9 movies in and the only thing that Rey can do is simply light up a lightsaber and teach some kids, then we're Nietzschean at this point. And nothing has set us up for that to be satisfying.
Okay.
Like, I will not weep at the end of that. I'll be like, I'm done with this. Personally.
Now, we could do also probably another talk will probably be, should Kylo be redeemed or not? And I know your mind at this moment would be, no, we shouldn't be redeemed. And I can concur with that probably.
I mean, what would redemption mean at this point? He's chosen basically to be a Nazi. Right. So what does redemption mean other than he has to completely undo everything that he is? But
then we'd have the talk of, is Darth Vader actually redeemed at the end of Return of the Jedi? But we will save that discussion.
Yeah. Point
being, if we put, because I think Kylo's fate and Rey's fate, that's Rey's fate and Kylo's are kind of interwoven in some way as far as an ending goes.
Clearly, yeah.
Right. So if he's not redeemed, if he's killed off or whatever, what is that? How does that impact Rey? Mm-hmm. So I'm feeling like if we agree that just Rey beating Kylo again isn't satisfying, then probably there's a joining forces in some way moment.
Against whom?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that's the question.
And this is the problem, yeah.
So, if we agree that Snoke is gone, again, maybe there's a slight possibility he's not gone. And I'll give a weird conspiracy theory on that in just a second.
Looking forward to it.
But if we agree to that,
yeah, then
in some ways our choice is almost maybe the First Order itself. In that maybe Kylo, we haven't heard the same rhetoric out of Kylo that, let's say, we heard out of Darth Vader. When he's, we can rule the galaxy as father and son. Or we didn't, like Hux, when Hux has his very Hitler-y speech, it's not Kylo saying it.
Yeah.
Notably, it's not Kylo stepping up to that mic and saying those things. Kylo, I think, sees the First Order as a way to hunt down Jedi, basically, right?
And so what's interesting to me is how this new set of films, and I still want to get to that conspiracy theory, I'm sorry to jump in. My idea of Darth Vader's role in the Empire was completely rearranged by watching this most recent set of films.
Okay.
Darth Vader doesn't fit into the Empire. His whole point was to do pretty much what Kylo was doing, to hunt down the Jedi Order and to eliminate them.
He did it very well.
He did it very well. But he was not part of the rank and file. Like, he wasn't giving orders. Grand Moff Tarkin was giving orders. What he did was he was basically kind of like an executioner in some ways for the Emperor.
I can see that. And with the mask even.
But he was not part, but he couldn't command in the same way. But he could control. So in that sense, I do see a parallel with Kylo, that he doesn't fit into the First Order, and he's not part of the regimentation of the First Order. But I don't want to pull off what you were trying to say.
Well, so my thought was, let's say we've got a situation where, we have Hux.
Yeah.
He's kind of a goof, comedic performance almost. But let's say, they don't have any love for each other.
Right.
I would say Moff Tarkin wasn't like a huge friend of Darth Vader, but I think he saw his value.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think they had a grudging, like, I get it. I'll work the system. You be my wet works guy.
Yeah.
Here, I feel like Hux and Kylo hate each other.
Yeah.
And I could see a situation where perhaps, maybe it's through Hux, maybe it's through somebody else. The First Order is like, you're a loose cannon. You're our Poe. You're more a liability to us than a help. Let's just kill this guy off. Or something like that. And so suddenly it's Kylo's on the outside of the First Order as well. And maybe in that way he has to join forces with Rey. He's like, well, the enemy of my enemy. They join forces to take out the First Order in some way. Maybe that's your ending. Sorry, I just hit the mic.
Sorry.
But maybe I'm trying to think of a way that it's not as simple. Rey takes out Kylo. Maybe perhaps the two of them were together. You could see maybe Kylo sacrificing himself at the end as some kind of big gesture to like redeem himself in death to take out the First Order. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out there.
Who is Vader in allegiance to? He's in allegiance to the Emperor. And because the Emperor is head of the Empire,
right,
he's got a connection to the Empire.
Correct. It was Snoke, right? It was Snoke, was Kylo's version of the Emperor. If we agree that Snoke's gone.
Yeah, but the First Order's not in allegiance to Snoke. The First Order is in allegiance to the First Order. Right. It doesn't have that clear head. So what's interesting, if I'm Catholic, and so thinking about this in terms of whether you have a pope or not a pope, and how an organization constitutes itself without a visible figurehead. So the empire constitutes itself with a visible figurehead in the person of the emperor. The First Order has no visible figurehead, with the possible exception of Hux. I mean, but
yes, I don't see Hux as
but who's the figure?
He's a huckster.
Yeah, who's the figurehead in the First Order?
Right.
There is none.
There is none.
Yeah, and so it's that already is an interesting difference.
You can't exemplify all of the evil of the organization in one person.
Yeah,
right?
and defeating that person doesn't defeat the First Order.
Right.
And this is the problem. What I said in the last video is that the First Order is now no longer simply. It's not that there's naive Nazism happening. There is enlightened Nazism happening, and now these individuals are choosing to ally themselves with evil.
Right.
And that's why I say that it's not that Rey has to defeat the First Order. She has to defeat the very idea of the First Order, which is why I think things like Holdo and that gives the way forward, where it's not just another bombing run, because the bombing run reconstitutes the idea of the First Order and creates an us versus them. These other approaches actually offer a way out, and would offer a way out for Rey. Now, do I think that the directors and everyone will get the latitude to actually tell that kind of story? No, because this is Disney.
It's an action movie.
It's an action movie.
It's an action
Disney.
movie with an action finale.
And the backlash against things like Solo, a Star Wars story, and against the second movie is strong enough that it's going to affect how that third movie is told. Plus, I think the death of Leia is going to change this a lot too. Let me say instead the death of Carrie Fisher, because Leia is not dead within the universe. In fact, they had an opportunity to kill her off with elegance and grace, and instead she force-switched herself into the
So that was a problem you had with because I had the problem with that too. But okay.
I mean, I think that it created problems for their. I understand now why they did it, and I had a satisfying emotional payoff.
Why do you think they did it?
Because Luke has to be able to hand her the fuzzy dice.
Okay. I thought that they did it because they still wanted to hold out the option that Kylo's redeemable. They couldn't have Kylo kill Leia. Now, I know he didn't push the button, but it's in that same bombing run where she dies.
Yeah.
It would all, anyway. But I thought, so if she doesn't die then, and see, look, none of his actions killed her.
And this is why, kind of thinking about this in terms of meat world structure, mimetic world structure, character to character, and that kind of structure in between is so fascinating because there are demands that are made by the meat world. She's no longer available to do real kind of complex storytelling.
Right. They're relying on the previous scenes they shot with her.
Yeah.
In Force Awakens and in Last Jedi, they have scenes they didn't use.
Yeah.
And they're going to like rotoscope her and put her into scenes.
Yeah.
Because they're not, apparently they've said they're not going to do a Moff Tarkin thing of just, making a CGI version.
But because now they are, it's the same thing with Heath Ledger as the Joker. Like, it creates problems for any movie that comes after because you have such a powerful central character to the story that is now going to change because that character is no longer available and is irreplaceable.
In fact, I said we're not going to talk about Kylo being redeemed.
Yeah,
but I'm about to talk. If I were to say, how would you do a redemption story for Kylo? The first way I would have done it would be, okay, you have to get forgiveness from your mom. Like, you've killed your dad. Somehow you have to get forgiveness from Leia in order to be redeemed.
Yeah.
Like, that's the person that has to say, I forgive you. And it's not going to happen. I don't see it. I mean, so that would be one strike against the redemption thing, is that you don't have that as a redemption option anymore.
Yeah. Well, so I'm thinking about this in terms of like the Iron Man series. So they took what in some ways a major character, Rhodey, and they completely changed the actor.
Sure.
And in some ways changed
Don Cheadle.
Yeah, changed the dynamic there. You don't have that option here.
You do not.
Yeah. So someone else speaking the words of forgiveness to Kylo would not work. So I agree, it's off the table. All right. So what is it that the meat world is going to impose on the structure? Because the structure could be a redemption structure. We've got the structural possibility. And how is that going to affect what's happening in the mimetic world, character to character? All of these things have to interplay with one another, and there's not a clean line among them, partly because narrative expectations have been so messed up by things like television. And so, so we were talking about this. So let me do a quick, and I want to get back to that conspiracy theory.
Okay, conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but let me do a quick excursus. So we now, in the 21st century, are at a point where the normal expectations of narrative arc are largely off the table. And the greatest example of that for me in recent memory is the television show 30 Rock.
Okay. Where
you have very clear dynamics and characters set up in the beginning of the show and carried for the first 2 seasons, which by the time you get to the final season of the show are completely thrown into the dumpster. Like, they completely continue to reinvent characters. Like, characters who are well established get their stories reinvented continually.
Could you give one example?
Yeah, sure. So Lutz is a character who has a I can't remember the name of the skinny blonde girl there, but they have a well established relationship throughout the first 3 seasons.
Okay.
In the final couple of episodes, the blonde girl acts as if she has no idea who Lutz is. So there's no payoff there. It's a cheat because you've actually gotten invested in these characters as they were within their world. And then you begin to realize that all these characters get to be reinvented continually at the whim of the writers for that episode.
Gotcha.
Okay. Difference from something like Parks and Recreation, where the characters that you meet at the beginning, they change and they grow, and The Office is the same thing. So Michael Schur is very good at keeping character continuity and keeping narrative continuity towards satisfying payoffs. Tina Fey can't do it to save her life. We're kind of in this because Tina Fey is a sketch writer. She's not a narrative arc writer. And Michael Schur,
I think maybe the point of 30 Rock in some ways was a week to week haha. I mean, it was to be funny and not necessarily, the bonus of having a narrative arc would be cool.
You're so generous to them, and okay. I found it to be so frustrating, and I go back and I rewatch The Office. I go back and I rewatch Parks and Rec, and I'm going back and I'm rewatching The Good Place, and I'm loving the development of these characters over time. I don't go back and rewatch 30 Rock. Even though I love individual episodes of 30 Rock, I get so frustrated by that breakdown. But what I'm using this as is kind of a glimpse of a larger phenomenon that's happening in storytelling right now.
Okay. Where
these normal kind of structural expectations of what a story is supposed to do are being, by some creators, chucked out the window without telling us that they're chucking them out the window. I'm not sure where the current Star Wars creative team is on that, whether they are into story continuity or whether they're not, whether they're into canon or whether they're not.
I would say that from The Last Jedi, you could make some cases that they're not.
Yeah.
That they're trying to I think, in fact, I think Rian Johnson even said, I was trying to surprise the audience. I was trying to give them things they didn't expect.
Yeah.
And so the idea of like, well, let's turn the story on its head, for better or worse, I'm saying I feel like could be a thing. Now, obviously, he's not in charge right now.
Yeah.
It's back to J.J. Abrams,
Yeah.
who I feel like maybe has a different idea of what the story should be.
Yeah. And J.J. Abrams is so good when he collaborates with people like Ryan. He's so bad when he does it on his own. I mean, when he's in collaboration, like something like Lost got brilliant because JJ was not in charge of it. When he's in charge of everything, it becomes Alias, and it's just stupid. So I'm just
some people liked Alias.
My wife's a big fan of Alias.
Yeah, my wife's a big fan.
Yeah, I happen to like elegant storytelling and complexity, and I happen to like being surprised by elegant storytelling, which I found The Last Jedi to be an incredibly satisfying movie for those surprise moments, and because of what it promised about what could come. The fact that he's been pulled out of a kind of creative lead on that, and that J.J. Abrams has been put back in, doesn't reassure me at all. Because again, I'm not a fanboy in that sense. I think I said in the last video, and I'll say it again, my innocence with the Star Wars franchise was fractured irrevocably when I found out that Luke and Leia were brother and sister. I've never recovered from that. And I've never recovered from that switcheroo. And from the fact that from the very beginning, this franchise has lied to me. Okay, so I'm very open to the franchise learning that lying to your audience is probably a bad idea on the meat level. I'm also open to the characters doing completely new and random things that are not blow them up, slice them down. I love that possibility because I think that there's real flaws in the structure of the story as Lucas set it up.
Well, and I will say, for instance, Lord of the Rings, but there's an example of essentially an action story in which the ending is a pacifist message.
Yes.
That the idea is, hey, we could have used this really powerful thing the whole time and just kicked ass. Mm-hmm. But that would have been wrong because we would become the thing that we were trying to fight.
Yep.
So the only real method is we have to do this incredibly difficult thing, which is destroy this thing instead of using it.
Frodo of the Nine Fingers.
Whew, the Limelighters. Yeah, this is a great soundtrack. So anyway, maybe there's a message there for Star Wars where you can still have your action-packed, we have to fight to the last man kind of scenario, but you're also define the expectation of just, and in the end, we'll just kill the guy with a sword. Mm-hmm. Like there are ways you can manipulate that you can still have an action movie, an action story with a let's fight at the end.
Well, and a person who understands the long sweep of how these narratives have developed, and that's one thing that I give kudos to George Lucas about, is that he actually went and really studied in depth the kind of mythic narrative structures, and he understood how to make those things work, and he played with them.
Like
not
Joseph Campbell.
But also with Japanese cinema. So if we look, for example, at Kurosawa, I mean, he's riffing on those things at a very deep level. And there are theories out there that say that you can find a chiasm structure, a kind of a mirrored structure, scene to scene from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, that if you work them backwards from where they meet, that they actually form a scene by scene mirror image of one another. Oh, and I'm not sure. Some people have gone back and actually done that. And if that's the case, then from a structural standpoint, I am in awe of George Lucas. Mm. But there are cases where the structure demands things that the story should never do. And so because he was beholden to this idea, if that is in fact his motivation, of making this chiastic structure, he made choices in the prequel trilogy that were horrendous in terms of narrative and storytelling, things that are unforgivable. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, that's that middle band between the meat world and the story world, is that he sacrificed things in the meat world in terms of fan expectation. And he and he failed to satisfy things in the story itself, the expectation
for the sake of that middle
for the sake of that middle band. Okay. I think that what is happening right now is that for the sake of the story world, the creators of this current set of movies are fiddling with the middle band, and it's really pissing off some of the people in the meat world, but it's going to be very satisfying to the progress of what's happening for these characters mimetically one to another within that world, and it's going to introduce some new possibilities for storytelling that won't fall into the 30 Rock problem.
I got you.
If they take this franchise and can move both its world and the way the story is told to a new level, for me, that's incredibly satisfying. That's interesting. That's worth sticking around for more movies for. If I'm just going to get the same story told again and again, maybe with boobs this time, that's problematic.
There's a shelf life on that.
There's a shelf life.
Probably already expired.
I've got other more interesting narratives, and to be honest, after Jar Jar Binks, I'm really not willing to get invested in these characters the way that I once did. I'll go to the mat for Luke and Han shot first and all that. And I still have a thing for Leia. All that is still true. But I don't have the same set of in-depth knowledge, and I haven't had the same repeat viewings of the prequel trilogy or these most recent movies that I've had with those first three films, because I got so invested in those first three films.
All right, here's your conspiracy theory.
Oh, please, yes.
Okay. So this is the way in which Snoke could still be around for episode 9.
Misa want to hear.
Yeah, actually, it's related to that.
I love it.
Oh, look at you. I already knew this thing. Okay.
No.
All right.
Anything that redeems Jar Jar would perhaps be a good thing.
No, actually, okay. It's not related to Jar Jar. No. Okay. Okay. So every film, especially in the Star Wars, they have working titles.
Yes.
Right? There's Blue Harvest. Notably, in the recent one, the Han Solo movie, the working title was Red Cup, because the Red Cup's a Solo cup. Oh, it's Han Solo.
Oh,
right. So it's kind of related in some way. So the working title, there have been 2 working titles. There was one, and then it got changed for the episode 9. First title was called Black Diamond, and then it was changed to Trixie. Okay. Now, Trixie is spelled Trixie, like a woman's name. Trixie. Hey, it's Trixie.
But it could be
tricks are for kids.
Trickse.
Could be. Right. You know where I'm going with this, but
maybe I'm just guessing. I'm guessing.
So they showed in Trixie, obviously in the middle of Trixie, you've got IX, episode 9, right? Yeah. You could see, oh, look, great, cool. But you can make this case of saying, okay, Andy Serkis plays the part of Snoke. He's the guy that put on the motion capture suit, and he does the voice, and he's that guy. All right. He's known for saying the word Trixie as Gollum in Lord of the Rings. I just said I brought it back to Lord of the Rings. Yay. But the Black Diamond, it also could be a reference to Snoke in that he's got that big ring with a giant black gem on it. And we don't know anything about it, but it's important enough that that's a big piece of jewelry.
Okay.
If you were just to say, and I think there's been some talk that Andy Serkis has been it's not 100% that he's been connected to episode 9, but he's been doing projects that anyway, I could imagine that they're calling it Trixie, Black Diamond could be a reference to Snoke. Trixie could be a reference to Andy Serkis, that they could be secretly bringing Snoke back into this story, and it's going to be Trixie. It's going to be a trick. We brought him back, and here he is. He's the big bad that they have to take on. The ultimate threat of the universe is back. I don't know. I just throwing that out there.
Well, but again, so here's the thing. So when in The Wizard of Oz, they finally meet Oz, the Great and Terrible, there has been build-up, and they've been talking about it, so that when you're confronted with Oz, you are amazed and overwhelmed. I have gotten none of that build-up with Snoke.
Yeah.
And so if suddenly Snoke is the central character...
is back again, you're like,
yeah.
Oh, it's yeah.
What? Yeah. And so where...
There's not a... Right. It just feels like it's a beat that they wrote down, and we're like, oh, let's just have this beat, as opposed to, let's lead up to this.
Yeah.
Effectively. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, but I'm throwing it out there as I've heard that conspiracy going around, like, maybe he's back. Yeah. And maybe it's just more people just wanting to know more about Snoke, and so they're like, oh, it'd be great if he was back and we knew about him.
But in Return of the Jedi, the boss battle that comes at the end is incredibly satisfying. Like, it's big, and the stakes are real, and the stakes for Luke are real, because Luke hasn't... So the thing that makes Luke fight back harder is, I've figured out now that you've got a sister. And Luke is now going to protect Leia,
right,
his thwarted love interest for me, but still.
Now his failure is complete.
Yeah, and so he boom, 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 and so you understand emotionally why Luke is fighting not just for his life but for Leia's life in that moment, and so it's bigger than he is. It's not just revenge; it's protection, and in that moment, Luke figures out that just killing Darth Vader won't help, because he needs to figure out a way to defang Vader as he needs Vader to learn. Okay. Rey, if this is paying off the way that I hope that it does, Rey needs this entire universe to learn. And so the redemption is not just the redemption of Kylo Ren. The redemption has to be everybody that would ever look at Kylo Ren and think that that's an estimable character.
Right.
That's somebody who would be cool to emulate, and anyone who thinks that the First Order is a viable option. There needs to be a massive shift in consciousness. I'm not sure how that happens in one film.
Yeah, I don't know that it can really, right?
So will there be a trilogy to follow this trilogy? Well, there has to be.
Oh, almost certainly.
So Rey,
I guess depends on the box office, but certainly.
So now I'm going to do my hypothetical. Rey doesn't redeem anything. Rey joins the dark side.
Sure, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
I don't see it, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, that would be, you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean,
and then you just end with a really downer, dark ending.
Yeah. And now you have a reason for the universe to the universe has no heroes anymore. So who's going to rise to redeem this universe? Well, we've already gotten a hint of that with the young broom sweeping kid.
Sure.
Okay. But will the broom sweeping kid learn that the old stories, because he's, they're recounting the stories of the great battles. Will they finally learn that the great battles don't solve anything? Will they finally learn that the way out of this is to literally get out of this and to stop thinking of, the Jedi as the heroes?
All right, I'll throw this out too.
Please,
then.
yeah.
I'm going to add to this. All right, so let's say Rey, I don't see this happening, but let's go with it.
Yeah.
Rey goes dark.
Yeah.
We've seen, there's at least enough reason to think she's not like all goody two-shoes that could happen.
You're right.
In fact, her urge to kill Kylo in the moment when she has him down is like, oh, okay, yeah, kill him. All right, so she could go dark.
Every good guy wants to kill Kylo, by the way.
Every good guy wants to kill Kylo. Maybe it's a switch, so maybe Kylo does get redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought of a way that Kylo could theoretically at least have the intention of mending his ways, whether he's actually redeemed or not. I think the only way that Kylo could kind of come to a moment of like, oh, okay, this has all been crap, would be if Anakin himself told Kylo, you're trying to be like me, you're wrong. Like, and you could do that with a Force ghost of Anakin talking to Kylo and telling him the error of his ways in such a way that Kylo realizes all of his attempts to be like his grandfather were misguided.
Okay.
Eventually. I'm just thinking that maybe if you had some kind of a switch where you end the movie with, or you end the trilogy with, Kylo's kind of a grayish, trying to reach the light guy, and Rey is a grayish trying to reach the dark heroine or villain.
Yeah.
And that's how you finish this thing off. I don't know, maybe.
And this will be the last thing because we've got to finish up. But
yeah.
But the only way that would work for me, and I love that idea, is if they don't bring Hayden Christensen back, but instead they use the real old Darth Vader to do it, who is, again, in my way of thinking, that's the real guy.
It's the real guy.
Yeah, and putting Hayden Christensen in that moment completely messes it up.
Would take you out of you're like, oh.
We don't see young Ben Kenobi. We don't see, we see, yeah, so it's just.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So if Hayden Christensen shows up to talk to Kylo, you're like, stay evil.
We know that Lucas is one, and we're trapped around the drain forever.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just for us to be Nietzschean and to accept that fact and to live towards it with desire instead of with shock and tragedy.
All right. Oh, good point. Yeah. Well said, sir.
I love talking about this stuff with you. Thank you, Matthew.
Our world is a bleak apocalyptic landscape that we embrace.
It's an apocalyptic landscape with a $14 billion merchandising arm. Yes.
All right. Very good, sir. It's a pleasure as always. We'll be doing more of these chats.
Yeah.
And if you out there have a topic that you would like Dave and I to overanalyze, we would love to do that.
Yes,
so feel free to give us suggestions for stuff that we would talk about.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Oh,
Reach across the mics.
Yep.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.